Hey everybody, I'm Zee Garcia, and today I'm taking a look at a big concept in a small package dealing with Greek culture and expansion. I'm talking about Emporion. In this card game, the players are going to be building up their empires by acquiring cards, using those cards to gain resources and acquire further cards, building up their empire, and ultimately looking for combinations of cards that allow them to gain the most victory points and win the whole thing. It's sort of an action selection game, card tableau building game, and so we're going to be taking a look at it. I'm going to give you a brief overview of how it works. I'll be looking mainly at the 2-player game, but I'll be talking about the 3 and 4-player versions of the game a little later on. And then we'll come on back after that and I'll give you some final thoughts, all right? So here we go. So to set up the game, we are going to give each of the players one of these 2 kinds of cards. They can choose whichever one they want. They could both even take the same kind. So they'll have one of those. We are going to set up the locations here for the actions, and then we'll put out some cards equal to the number of players in each line. So I'm going to be showing you here a game with 2 players, so 2 in each. Then you are going to give each player 2 of these cards face down as spoils. I'll talk about those later. Each player has a token. Each player has 2 of these coins to help them reserve cards later on in the game. And then we flip over 4 of these cards. And these are going to... Oh, this one's in the wrong deck. There we go. Then we are going to pretty much be ready to play. And so the idea here is to gather cards by using your resources in order to grow your empire, be able to buy bigger and better cards, gain victory points, and ultimately win the game. So on your turn, you are going to do one of a few different things, but they're all driven by taking this token and placing it on one of these action spots or moving it from the action spot it was sitting on the previous round. So at the beginning of the game, let's say I want to go here. This row, just like this one and this one here, are going to function essentially the same way. So if I go there, I can acquire one of those cards, assuming I can pay for that card, or I could trigger an action on one of the cards in front of me that is of that kind. So you've got the military cards here, these with the harp, and then you've got the economy cards up here. And going there, again, allows you to acquire those cards. Now, all of these cards are going to... Let's go ahead and grab, let's say that one there. It's going to have a cost down here in this corner. It's going to give you some resources up here in this corner. It'll tell you the kind of card it is right there. And if it has any other special abilities or icons, then they show up on this corner up here. So this one has one of those. This starting card here has no cost, just like all of these. It provides you with one of that resource type, and it has a special icon here that ties into replenishing the board. So let me talk about that and that action, which is taken right there. If you choose to take that action, you are going to count up how many ships you have, and you are going to move that many cards, up to 4, from the future market here to the current market. And then you'll replenish this up here. If it's a single card you're moving down, you'll replenish it from this deck. If it's more than one, then you must take at least 1 card from here and 1 card from here. So if you do all 4, let's say, you can do this however you want to. 1 and 3, 2 and 2, or 1 from this one and 3 from that one. Besides that, depending on how many cards you move down here, you are going to get more spoils from this pile. You take some cards face down, you never look at them, and you set them in your spoils pile. Those can be used as a wild resource towards acquiring anything you want to acquire. And then lastly, you've got this spot here that lets you simply reserve one of these cards, put it in front of you, put a token on it, and you can build that one later on in the game. So let's go ahead and show you a couple of rounds here. Let's say, as I said, I'm going first. I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to acquire this card. It has no cost, so it goes in front of me. And now I have access to a few different symbols. I now have 2 military symbols and one of these economic symbols. And then it'll be my opponent's turn. My opponent cannot go where I am. They can never be on the same spot as me, except to reserve cards down here. So they're going to go right there, and they'll take one of these cards, which again, to them, is free because it has no cost. Then I have to move. I cannot end up where they are, and I cannot stay where I was. So my options are here, here, or here. So let's say I want to come here and take one of these. I'll put that in front of me. Goes back to my opponent. They'll go up here and take this one, still free. And then it comes back to me, and I'm ready now to replenish the market, which, by the way, does replenish automatically if it's ever completely emptied, but you don't get the benefit of the spoils. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I count how many ships I have. I have 2 right now. I pick 2 of these cards, and they move down. Then I replenish this with at least 1 card from each pile, so no question as to how I do it right now. And then I get 2 spoils because I moved 2 cards. Goes back to my opponent, and my opponent is going to, let's say they want to acquire this card here. Do they have enough for that? Let's pretend they do, okay? Just to show you how that works. Let's say they've got more spoils. This card costs 1 military, 4 coin symbols. They have 1 military, they have 1 coin symbol. So they pay 3 of these cards to make up the difference in coins. Those go to the bottom of this pile. And they have now acquired that card. They can set it over here with the other cards of its type. Now that card has a couple of special symbols at the top. Those are scoring opportunities. This one says 1 point per card of this kind and 1 point per card of this kind. These come out of this deck. There's only 2 different kinds of cards in this deck. You have the vases here, and these score on a sliding scale. So depending on how many you have at the end of the game, you'll get a varying amount of victory points. So 3 of these equals 17 victory points. And the cost of them does creep up depending on how many you've already got. And then these are going to usually give you straight up victory points. So this is 5 victory points. And then we have this one here, which is more expensive, of course, and that's 10 victory points. So this is going to continue. The players taking turns, acquiring cards, building up the amount of resources they have to acquire cards, moving cards down here, sometimes reserving cards, and then building those until someone gets to 18 cards in front of them. That does not count anything reserved, and that does not count spoils. And then the game is over and you score up your victory points. So the victory points are based on 3 things. First of all, these cards here. You add up the victory points in the corners and you figure this out. In this case, I'm looking at 17 plus 5, giving me 22 from that. Second, you look at these on the cards and you figure out the score you get from that. So let's say, for example, that's what I have. These are my cards. This one gives me 1 victory point for each of these kinds of cards. I have a single one, so that's 1 point. And this one gives me a victory point for each of these kinds of cards. I have 3, so 3 victory points. And then lastly, you lose 3 victory points for each of these reserved cards that you have not built yet. And that's pretty much all there is to it. So now that you should have a pretty good idea of how it all goes. As I said, this is a game with 2 players. With more than 2 players, you are using a single token up here, and you simply must move it from where the last player left it. So if player number 1 puts it there, player number 2 must pick it up and move it elsewhere. Player number 3 must once again pick it up and move it elsewhere. And then you've also got these cards, which are a variant you may use. These are double-sided. Well, not that one, but these are double-sided. There we go. And these are going to have a pretty high cost, but they'll have really strong multipliers. They begin set aside in play. You can acquire them right off the bat. The way to acquire these, by the way, that's something I have not yet mentioned, is through some of these cards. Since these do not tie to any of these rows, then the way to acquire them is by going to one of these cards, by going to the matching line, and using the action of acquiring one of those. It's listed right there. It's an upright card symbol with the matching card type on it. This one here does 2 things. It allows me to acquire those vases, and it scores for them at 1 times the number I have at the end of the game. So there you go. That's everything you need to know. Let's go back up top and let me tell you what I think of it. All right, that is Emporion. Let's talk about this. I'm going to start with thematic ties. I think it's got an interesting theme. I like that sort of Greek setting and the idea of building up your nation with nothing but cards and a couple of resources I find appealing. I like the way that they are able to implement that. No, it's not really thematic, but much like the well-known Seven Wonders, it attempts to give you a large scope and a lot going on in about 40 minutes or so with really very few components, and I appreciate that. So I like the theme here. The aesthetics of the game, component quality, congruent artwork, things like that. This one, unfortunately, gets a thumbs down for me. I think the artwork is fine. I think it looks good. I think it all is congruent, looks the same across the entire feel of the game, the look of the game. But I have a big problem with the iconography in the game. I think it's not intuitive. It is a little sloppily handled. Everything does make sense. There are no mistakes in the iconography of the game. It is just not diverse enough to help teach the game or to really look good on the cards, and ultimately does not all work well together into making what could be a fairly easy game to play and teach, especially. It makes that a little more challenging than it should be. Replayability. Does the game scale well? Are there new things to discover? Things like that. I don't think the game scales well. I think it's mainly a 2-player game that you can play with 3 and 4 players. I don't like the 3 and 4 player version nearly as much as I like it with 2. I think with 2, there is a nice amount of back and forth. You can sort of count on your opponent evacuating a spot so you can jump back in there. With 4 players, for example, if the person right before you seems to be targeting the same location in the tableau there, the same action that you seem to be targeting, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So, because they keep jumping onto it, which means on your turn you must leave it. And since you don't have your own token, you cannot count on them. If their token is sitting there right before their turn, they have to leave in a 2-player game. You're good. You'll be able to take that action. Not true in a game with 3 or 4 players. So that's a problem. As far as discovering new things, yeah, there's some of that, especially looking for combinations of cards that work well together. It's all evident, it's apparent what will work well together. You match that symbol with that symbol, get both of those, get a lot of these, and your score will go up. But that's still fun to attempt to do it. You'll sort of see it the first time you play the game and go, oh, okay, I really didn't focus enough on I got this symbol that scores, but then I didn't focus enough on cards of that type. Cool, I'll do that next game. But that's it, and then you just try to do that well. That's about the discoverability of the game. So I think it scales worse than it plays, right? I do think that the repeat plays with just 2 players are not bad, but I don't think it scales well. The game length, interesting the whole time. Does it get repetitive? Does it outstay its welcome? Anything like that? I think the game of the length is solid. I think going to 18 cards is good. I think the game does have a pretty strong shift from acquiring cards that give you a solid foundation of resources to, okay, I'm just making victory points now. I'm just going to keep going bing, 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 and buying up all of these cards that give me 5, 10 victory points, or the vases, So I don't think it's as smooth a transition as in a game like, say, Dominion, in which the more cards you buy that give you victory points, the more the engine, so to speak, decays. And at some point, you might have to jump from one foot back to the other and actually pad the engine out a little bit more. In this one, you don't break those cards. So once you're making, let's say, 7 military symbols, acquiring cards that consume those things, that require them, don't take away your military symbols. So you can sort of plateau that, A game like Seven Wonders deals with this with the fact that it has 3 H decks. And in the third one, you're not building up infrastructure. You did that in H1 and part of H2. In H3, you are just using what you've already built to, pump the machine, right? In this one, those cards don't cycle out. They still show up. Really basic cards can show up in the game very late in the game. And so, but you really won't be probably targeting those. The game's still not long enough for that to be particularly problematic. I'm just sort of pointing out something that happens pretty quickly. You go from very few resources to suddenly enough to do what you want to just getting it done. Ease of play. Is it fiddly? Are there extraneous rules? Is it easy to teach? I do think the game's easy to teach. I think it's one that's got interesting concepts at play. For the most part, it's easy to teach, barring iconography sort of messiness. It's the symbols for, oh, this is an action power. Oh, this is a scoring power. Those sorts of things are not nearly as obvious as I would like. But I do find the gameplay, what you are intended to do in the game, is smooth. You pick an action, you move your token, you do a thing. Acquire a card, reserve one, or buy one from the set aside ones, which is technically, acquiring a card as well. So that's fine. It's still a little messy, but that's I think the ease of play isn't too bad. And the only things that are hurting it are things I already mentioned. And then lastly, tactics and strategies of the game. Too lucky does it feel balanced? Are there interesting choices in play? Yes, I do think that the choices stay interesting throughout the game. I think you have to contend with what your opponent is blocking. That's part of it. You have to contend with, should I reserve a card? Or do I go and move that card down to the market, make some of those spoils for my troubles, and then just pick up that card anyway when it's my turn? Will it be there, right? Is my opponent going to take that card? So those are interesting choices. Managing your spoils is actually a big part of the game because that's a massive flexibility that the game allows you to have. But if you burn through those, you're going to have to be the one replenishing the market for your opponent to simply reap those rewards. So you have to be careful with when you do it, how often you do it. Some of the cards also score based on the spoils you kept at the end of the game. How much do you spend them? Do you hold them back? I guess my only issue that I could see being a problem here in the tactics and strategy part is it is technically possible for you to math out perfectly the last few turns in the game. If you are someone who does that, if you can stop and look at a card and go, okay, that card is going to cost me 6 spoils to buy. It will score me this many points. However, if I instead just keep the spoils, I can score them with this and this. And with a couple of sort of intricacies to what I'm laying out, that could be a problem. That could slow down the game considerably if you know you're someone like that, if you're going to be overly analytical, if you're going to be wanting to do that process, then maybe this is something that's going to sort of grind to a halt with you specifically, or someone you play with who is like that. Overall, I think the game has good ideas. I like the theme, as I said. I like that it reminded me a little bit of a Seven Wonders style card game, with both the theme and sort of the empire building, the quick progression of that. I could even see it sort of living in that family of games, but it is, unfortunately, the graphic design really hurts for me. I don't want to teach this game because the iconography is not great. If this was reworked and looked better, I'd be a lot happier. If the usability went up, and if it was a little more nuanced in the progression from engine building to grabbing points. That does not seem... nuance is a good word for it. So, and I also don't think it scales well. So overall, I don't hate the game. I feel like I'm just pointing out all the bad stuff here. I enjoyed it. I've enjoyed my plays with this. I thought it went well. Once the other person once I knew what was going on in the game and the other person knew what was going on in the game because I ended up teaching it, then I was content to play. I was happy with the way things were going. They would take a spot I wanted to go to, and I'd be like, oh, no, I got to wait to do that next time. That's all fine. It's the promise of a really good looking, easy to teach and play game that irks me, you know, because it's in there. The promise is in there, but just it's not quite accessible, you know. So, like I said, I enjoy it, and if it looks great to you on the table, if my explanation made sense, if you find the rulebook and read it and that sounds good to you, then yes, give it a shot. I'm not saying don't try this one. I'm just saying it could have been handled better, unfortunately, and there are other games that fit the style that do handle it better. And that's going to hurt this game. So there you go. That is Emporion. Hopefully you enjoyed that review. Thanks for tuning in and checking this out with me. I'm Zee Garcia, and I'll see you on the next one.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com.